Well, most probably to the disappointment of the Morrison government, let me go back to where we ended last year and the infamous Brereton report and the work of our commandos who were recruited in Sydney and the SAS whose base was in Perth. The Brereton report was released on November 19, a very significant date. I'll come to that in a moment. Remember, the Prime Minister, ahead of the release, argued the report contained brutal truths. Our Prime Minister apologised to the President of Afghanistan. The Chief of the Defence Force, Campbell, told us that families in Afghanistan would be compensated. Campbell, the Chief of the Defence Force, said there was shameful findings. Burr, the Army Chief, said he was sickened. But it's interesting to note the top brass at the time, because the report was for the period in Afghanistan from 2007 to 2013, the current Governor-General was the Chief of the Defence Force during 3 years of that time. The Defence Force Chief Angus Heston was a commander between 2005 and 2011, the period in question. So was Lieutenant General David Morrison, the bloke who made that stupid speech on Australia Day in 2016. He too was a commander, but he was made Australian of the Year. But just coincidentally, the Brereton report exonerated such people. And remember, before you could say Afghanistan, the same Angus Campbell, one of the commanders during the period in question, said he was writing to the Governor-General to ask that the meritorious unit citation to more than 3,000 Special Forces personnel be revoked. Of course, they're running for cover now on this revocation, and I'll come to that in a moment. Bear with me. This is very, very important. Remember the further indignity? There was talk that the Brereton report would be put on display in the War Memorial, an institution, we're told, that is a place of truth. I asked last year of Prime Minister Morrison, Defence Minister Reynolds, Chief of the Defence Force Campbell, Chief of the Army Burr, what place would be given in the War Memorial, the place of truth, for Sergeant Hekmatullah, the Afghan soldier who murdered 3 Australian soldiers in cold blood as they sat playing cards. After all, if we're going to accurately record all aspects of the war, where will the story of Sergeant Hekmatullah be told? As you know, this talk of brutal truths has caused enormous damage to our soldiers and our veterans. Put simply, suicide. But it's far worse than anything you have heard. This is a massive stitch-up. Let me make this point. The Brereton report was released on November 19. Remember Campbell and Burr and a lot of them big-noting themselves that they'll strip the Meritorious Citation Award from thousands of veterans who served in Afghanistan, even though General Campbell, who hangs onto his Distinguished Service Cross, but was the commander of the Middle East operation, is exonerated. But the move immediately was to deny these worthy soldiers who followed the government's directive and went to war in Afghanistan, strip them of the Meritorious Citation. Well, here's the rub. In 1991, letters patent were issued by Her Majesty the Queen and countersigned by Prime Minister Hawke. The term letters patent has Latin derivation. It's a legal instrument. It's a published written order issued by a monarch or a head of state. And it usually grants an office or a title or a status to a person. Letters patent. So the monarch, Queen Elizabeth, signed letters patent, countersigned by Prime Minister Hawke in 1991, creating the Meritorious Unit Citation, 1991. Remember November 19, 2020 was the date the Brereton report was released? What you haven't been told is that on July 13 last year, 5 months before the release of the Brereton report, the letters patent creating the Meritorious Unit Citation were altered. I might add, nothing in the original letters patent provided for the removal of the citation in block from a whole unit. The original letters patent didn't even provide for the revocation of the citation. They merely provided for the issuing of an order that a recipient could not wear the insignia. Now, it's clear the Prime Minister signed off to alter the letters patent well in advance of the release of the Brereton report. The report was released on November 19. The letters patent had been altered on July 13 to provide for the very request that Campbell, in his immediate response to the report, said he'd be making to the Governor-General to revoke the citation from everybody. What Morrison signed off on July 13 changed the letters patent, gave everyone, from the head of defence, the head of the army, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Defence Minister, the power to revoke the Meritorious Unit Citation from everybody. That was the nature of the alteration made by the Prime Minister on July 13 last year, 5 months ahead of the release of the Brereton report, but the Prime Minister told no one. These people were colluding to cover their own backsides and deny the public the truth. There's much more to it than this, and it does get worse. On the line, I have the young man to whom I spoke last year, Heston Russell, who was the platoon commander of the 2nd Commando Regiment. He completed 4 deployments to Afghanistan. I told you last year that in the last 5 years, he's lost more friends to suicide than during his 4 deployments to Afghanistan. More than 10 soldiers from his unit have killed themselves. More than 400 veterans have taken their lives since 2001, and that has continued tragically over the Christmas holidays. Of course, Heston Russell is guilty too of unproven offences, as is everyone else, because no one has been named. He joins me. Heston Russell, thank you for your time on this dreadful subject, but very briefly on the letters patent. They were altered on July 13 last year.
Yeah, good evening, Alan. Yeah, as you've correctly stated, there's been a bunch of actions that have gone on behind all of our backs to essentially allow the actions of a few to be taken against the many, as we saw at the end of last year with the announcement of the Brereton report and the findings and the actions to revoke citations from over 3,000 people.
So the Prime Minister gave himself this power, and the power to the Defence Minister, the Chief of the Defence, all the top brass, to revoke the meritorious unit citation from everybody way back in July. Now, they seem to have balked at doing this. This has been all covered up, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's been a big backstep, as we've seen, with the public outcry against this group punishment, but there's still a lot to be answered for, as you've alluded to, Alan.
Well, look, during the Christmas holidays, you visited families, I know, of Afghan veterans. We'll take a break here, but Heston Russell, stay with me, because you, my viewers, won't believe what you're about to be told. This is bastardry to our vets with a capital B. Heston, thank you for waiting for us. Can you just explain the Special Forces and their service in Afghanistan very briefly? Isn't it true that they've always had a partner force supported by the military Special Afghan Police on the ground, and that each mission had to have approval from the Afghan government, the partner force, for their activities? Isn't that true?
Yes, Alan. So particularly from 2010 onwards, and when I was there in 2012, we had a minimum of 30% and then up to 50% of all the force we had on the ground had to be Afghan partner force, and we were there in support of them and their actions on the ground.
And isn't it true that during the conduct of all those operations, no reports were made from the Afghan partner forces of any atrocities, the murdering of civilians or farmers or whatever? Nothing had ever happened which caused the Afghan partner to the mission to report to their government.
That's the incredible fact. Not a single one was raised to the threshold whereby the Afghan government spoke out and said that we weren't doing the right thing.
Right. Now, to the difficult stuff. You spoke to the wife of one of these people who didn't know he was mentioned in the Brereton report. The wife told you, I think, that he loved his job. He had a huge belief in what he was doing. He had over 20 years' service. He was proud to be in the uniform. The Brereton report was released in November 2020. This man was collared by the Defence heavyweights in March 2020, months before the report was released. And before March, he thought he had nothing to worry about.
Yeah, in December, I travelled over to Perth and met with about half a dozen such families. And yeah, one of those stories, Alan. Since March, this man's been removed from his job, lost his allowances, and degraded to a point where he's had 2 admissions to hospital and has been on suicide watch since then.
I mean, the inquiry had been going on for 4 years, and then this. Absolutely. And I understand he was directly contacted by Brereton via an email. The interview was done by video conference. The wife told you he came home traumatised. He drove his car home in shock, went into a shell, and following that point, he wasn't allowed to speak to anyone about what had happened. There's been no support for his family. He can't tell anyone. No one cares about the family, the wives or the children, and he's in total isolation. And the wife is his only emotional support. Is that the case?
Yes, Alan, and unfortunately it's not just one incident. There's so many, and it's really been shocking personally and professionally to hear these stories.
And there's no charges against these people?
No charges, and that's so important to highlight to the Australian people, Alan. We've seen an inquiry released. The laws and rules of evidence haven't applied. Now them and their whole families have to go through an investigation. But thank God we finally have this Office of the Special Investigator established.
She's no longer, she said to you, a parent. She's trying to shield her children. Her husband felt he was hunted and trapped and vilified. But no charges laid. He was stood down, his pay's taken from him, his car taken from him. He's not allowed to be on his own. He's supervised 24/7. And then he was delivered home after interrogation, and the wife wasn't consulted. Am I right in saying no one's reached out to her? She had no idea what's happening to her husband. He's not allowed to leave WA or Perth. No one from the chain of commands made contact. He's allowed no contact with friends. What the hell?
It's honestly, Alan, it sounds unbelievable. And as I sat there watching her break down, crying, telling me this, this is an Australian mother, regardless of any circumstances, it's been criminal to say the least.
But did she tell you that everything about her had been leaked to the media by people in the know? So her husband can't talk, she can't talk, but the media were talking about Brereton. This was in March, before the November release, and she got a call from the ABC. Just explain that to us.
Yeah, so in May, she got a call from the ABC direct to her personal mobile number by a female executive, I won't name on here, but I know her name, who said that she knew who she was, who her husband was by name, where they lived, and requested her comment on a story and on an article they intended to publish.
And then basically virtually tried to intimidate her in speaking to them by saying, we know all about you. If you don't talk to us, we'll let people know. I mean, the wife has no idea what to do. Now, before Christmas, explain what happened to her husband.
Yeah, absolutely. So before Christmas, most of these gentlemen were issued with termination notices. So they had to provide a 2-week turnaround justification as to why their employment within the Defence Force.
Even though no charges have been laid, no guilt established.
Absolutely, Alan. And I saw some of these termination notices that literally have the exact same accusations as credible information that has been brought from the Brereton report. So these people are not only awaiting this to be passed to an official investigation by the police, but at the same time, through the cover-up that is the current Defence Administration system, has to justify why their employment should not be terminated before any conviction's been recorded.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this has all been premeditated. He was given 2 weeks to respond. He responded, and he's heard nothing from anyone. Defence, nothing. And the wife said Defence has thrown us under the gutter. Then he got a termination notice from Defence at the start of December.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want the Australian people to picture this while everyone's gone through their own lockdowns and uncertainty over the Christmas, New Year's period. There is over a dozen Special Forces veterans, some with over 20 years, who spent the Christmas and New Year period having to submit a justification why not only their career and livelihood should not be terminated, but what they should do with their families in the future. And they provided those response within a 2-week period and are still yet to await a response. We're now at the 1st of February, and their families have endured the entire Christmas and New Year period not knowing what is going to happen to their future.
Astonishing. Leave it with us. We're not going to leave it there, but we'll keep talking about it. Thank you for your time. It's very, very distressing, and the Australian public, I think, are absolutely appalled. Heston Russell, I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you, Alan.